Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot. Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. 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 Parrot TV.
The Literary Corner, brought to you by New York Parrot TV, the voice for humanity. Hello, welcome to World Inkers Network. I am Dustin Pickering, your noble and honest host. It has been a while for our audience watching today. We have been a little bit incognito for the time, but we're back on air for this wonderful program on post-colonial literature and the legacy of Edward Said. I'm going to give you a brief overview of Said's legacy and his contributions here to introduce the program so you know what you're getting into. So Edward Said was born into a Christian Palestinian family in Jerusalem in 1935. The city was then part of British-occupied Palestine. Said spent his life and writings advocating for an independent Palestinian state. He received a Bachelor of Arts from Princeton University in 1957 and a PhD in English literature from Harvard in 1954. His work defined post-colonial literary studies, and he is considered one of the most influential intellectuals of the 20th century. His 1978 book, Orientalism, opened avenues for discussion about how Western views of Eastern cultures were shaped by imperialism. Prior to the book, Western accounts of Eastern traditions were treated as neutral. Said's observations note how the misrepresentations of outside cultures are rooted in dehumanization to justify colonialist expansion. Future writers such as Salman Rushdie and Arundhati Roy also were influenced by Said. Rushdie was close friends of Said and frequently cites him as an influence in his own work of moral courage. Rushdie and Roy both utilized Said's observations to reclaim their cultural heritage and histories. Said's legacy helped define humanism as non-exclusionary and posed universal definitions for the struggle for justice globally. His 2004 book, written post 9/11, Humanism and Democratic Criticism, offers that the goal of humanism is critical self-reflection and suggests this reflection cannot occur without viewing other cultures. He shares concerns that the humanities are in decline and critiques the strict focus on multiculturalism and criticism of Eurocentrism as being exclusionary. He recenters the role of the intellectual and suggests a return to philological study. He says in the book, quote, "The humanities crisis is based on the misperception that there is an inexorable conflict between established traditions and our increasingly complex and diversified world. Yet this position fails to recognize that the canonized thinkers of today were the revolutionaries of yesterday, and that the nature of human progress is to question, upset, and reform," end quote. Said was also passionate about music, especially European classical music, and co-authored books on music. Said died of leukemia in 2003. I would like to introduce our first speaker and guest, TAYSEER ODEH. Give you his bio real quick here. He is a Palestinian Jordanian writer and translator. Among other outlets, his writing has appeared in Copper Canyon Press, Mission Quarterly Review, the New York Review of Books, Arab Lit Quarterly, Holy Land and Palestine Studies, Arab Studies Quarterly, Journal of Postcolonial Writing, the Harvard Crimson and Harvard Divinity School's Peripheries, a journal of word, image, and sound, for which he edited and translated a folio of recent poetry from Gaza with Mossab Abu Taha in 2021. He co-translated and co-edited a poetry anthology from Gaza and the West Bank with Shira Blut, You Must Live, which was published by Copper Canyon Press in 2025, Penguin Random House UK in 2026. He also serves as an international advisor on the editorial board of the Journal of Holy Land and Palestine Studies, in which his recent interview with the historian Avi Shalem appeared, and he serves as a judge for the Arabic Encyclopedia Arabica at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, alongside writing competitions, including the Jubilee Institute's Award for Creative Writing in 2022. Abu Adeh also translated Samuel Moyn's Liberalism Against Itself, Cold War Intellectuals, and the Making of Our Times, which was published by Arab Network for Publishing and Distribution 2025. Abu Adeh was awarded a Slife Fellows Mobility Program grant in 2009 and Slife Leadership Initiative Award from Tokyo Foundation in 2018. He is a recipient of the Outstanding Dissertation Award from Indiana University of Pennsylvania in 2017. He was also a former visiting scholar at the University of California, San Diego in 2009. His research interests include, but are not limited to, Orientalism, Somali literature, religion and secularism, Palestine studies, higher education, Jewish literature, eco-criticism, literary translation, Islam and modernity, Arab poetry and fiction, Islamic and European philosophy, neoliberalism, and the global South. So we're going to introduce Mr. TAYSEER ODEH, and please stay tuned for ANTARA BHATTACHARJEE pretty soon here at the end of his presentation. And I would like to bring him on the show to discuss Saeed and his legacy. Thank you for joining us. Here he is. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you so much for this generous introduction. Thank you. I'm happy here to be with ANTARA as well. Well, my topic will be mainly about the legacy of Edward Said, exile, and the role of the intellectual. I'm reminded of a keynote abstract sent by Hamid Dabashi a long time ago in 2018, when I invited him to Tunis conference to give a talk on Edward Said. And he sent me this unpublished abstract where Hamid Dabashi writes, if Edward Said were to come back to life today, he would not recognize the three words closest to his mind and his heart he left behind some 15 years ago when he died on 25 September 2003. He wouldn't believe what depth of terror and racism Donald Trump has unleashed in a country he called home for much of his adult life. He wouldn't recognize his beloved Arab world either in the euphoria of the Arab Spring he wouldn't have loved to see, or in the savagery of Israel, the butchery perpetrated at their hands, the murderous mayhem in Yemen, the barefaced massacre of Palestinians in Gaza or other atrocities elsewhere in his ancestral homeland. He would have not recognized the post-Brexit UK and the unleashing of xenophobic neo-fascism in the rest of Europe. The worlds beyond these three worlds are in worlds that wouldn't be any more recognizable to him. The rise of Bolsonaro in Brazil, the bare-faced racist Hindu fundamentalism of Modi in India, the genocide of Muslims in Myanmar under the watchful eyes of the world, the emergence of Muslim concentration camps in China, end quote. I think this quote very much resonant with the legacy of Edward Said. And much of, by the way, much of Edward Said's writing uses the form of the essay, which is very interesting. And that form was kind of discursive, informal, and alert to the requirements of particular problems, while mindful of the obligations to its material. Said defends the essay as his adopted form. And he said he keeps in favor of, Said is and has been in favor of addressing various representations of power dynamics, the grand narratives, and humanist criticism through using the form of the essay. He writes, if I am to be taken seriously as saying that secular criticism deals with local and worldly situations and that it is constitutively opposed to the production of massive hermetic systems, then it must follow that the essay, a comparatively short, investigative, rather skeptical form, is the principal way to write criticism. End quote. And it's quite interesting why Edward Said is very much, drawing on the form of the essay throughout his legacy. For Said, there are central 6 concepts: colonialism, imperialism, culture, exile, Palestine, and the intellectual, which are not separate topics of study. They are interconnected gears in a single analytical machine. Said's entire life's work is dedicated to showing how power, narrative, and identity shape one another. To understand how he maps out this kind of intersection, we can look at how these elements weave together into a consistent framework. Culture as the engine of imperialism and colonialism. In his seminal works, Orientalism, 1978, and Culture and Imperialism, Said revolutionized how we look at empires. He argues that imperialism is not just an affair of soldiers, of flags, geography, and land grabs. It is fundamentally sustained by culture. And here I would like to draw your attention to the meaning and implications of culture according to Edward Said and many other towering figures of cultural studies. By mistake, some people take the term culture for granted, whereas it is loaded with different connotations, especially the Eurocentric meaning of culture. If we go back to Raymond Williams, it means a whole way of life, but it's insufficient just to define it as such, because culture for many Western thinkers means it is something just allocated and relegated to the Western superiority. The power of narrative, according to Edward Said, is a central term. Before an empire can militarily conquer a territory, it must culturally construct the people by refashioning their lives. And most of the time, the mainstream representation of Arabs, Muslims, Asians, and Orientalists or Oriental, they have been painted as inferior, exotic, or incapable of self-rule. Orientalism for Edward Said cannot be just put into words simply, but we can say it's a Western style of thought for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. The Orient here, the East. So novels, poetry, scholarly texts, and travelogues created a distorted image of the East that legitimizes colonial rule as a civilizing mission. And this is one approach of the colonial enterprise. The cultural shield, or the cultural camouflage. Culture provides the ideological cover and veneer for imperialism. Without the widespread cultural belief in Western superiority, the physical act of colonialism would collapse under its own moral contradictions. And the debate on the meaning and implications of cultural hegemony is widely public, and we should remember Antonio Gramsci, and the theory of cultural hegemony in this regard. Palestine and the geography of exile. I think Edward Said is strangely, affiliated with exile, and to a certain extent he romanticizes exile for some critics, and he's been critiqued by some people, because to a certain extent you feel that if we go back to a very well-known article written by Judith Butler, what shall we do without exile? So that is a question raised in the subconscious of Edward Said. But Palestine here is the cornerstone. Palestine is a concrete, urgent site where Said's theories of imperialism and culture collide with humanism. For Said, Palestine is the ultimate modern causality of the imperial process. Palestine here is the concrete embodiment of Edward Said intellectual framework. And we should go through different Zionist, implications that have to do with the representation of Palestine, the denial of narrative, from Ben-Gurion to many other founders of Zionism. We are told that there is no such thing as Palestine, to the extent that they would say willy-nilly Palestine does not exist. Said points out that the colonization of Palestine relies heavily on a cultural myth. That is to say, a land without a people for a people without a land. To colonial powers and Zionist narratives, the indigenous Palestinian population is rendered culturally invisible or dismissed as backward. That is exactly the intersection between the denial of narrative and Orientalism. The condition of exile. For Said, the disposition of Palestinians in 1948, including the family of Edward Said, was expelled because of the Nakba, and then he moved to Cairo, and from there he went to the USA, where he established his career at Columbia later on. This dispossession of Palestinians in 1948 and during the aftermath of this period of time created a massive population of refugees. Said himself lives this reality as a displaced Jerusalem-born Arab in Western academia. And most of the time, if you grapple with the meaning of exile, usually exile for Said signifies a paradox. Exile is a deeply painful fracture existence. It's a state of being where Said wrote his brilliant memoir out of place. However, it's also a powerful epistemological tool, a way of knowing the world. Exile here is an approach, is a kind of window through which Said would explore the world, and of course, beginning from Palestine, because the exile exists between two different worlds, but belongs fully to neither. They possess a unique clarity that those comfortable in their homelands lack. That's why Edward Said is very much obsessed with the contradictions of exile in relation to the role of the intellectual. Back to the role of the intellectual and the exiled truth teller. If you go back to Jesus Christ, according to Said, Jesus is one of the most, original and authentic public intellectuals, because for Said, the intellectual is the one who could rub Kelcher's nose in the mud of politics. The intellectual is the one who speaks truth to power. And this brings us to the core of Said's ethics. What is the role of the intellectual? Why does it matter? Why it is worth exploring? And sometimes we cannot exaggerate the role of the intellectual, especially given the socioeconomic and the political context in the Arab world, the global South, and elsewhere. And Said, of course, famously outlines in his 1993 Wreath Lectures representations of the intellectual, which was published later on as a wonderful book. Said argues that a true intellectual must embrace the condition of exile, whether literal or metaphorical. To do their job effectively, the intellectual, be it the traditional or the organic, according to Gramsci, should speak truth to power. So the primary duty of the intellectual is to dismantle the comforting state-sponsored narratives of imperialism and rejecting being co-opted by power dynamics. And of course, along with nationalism, the intellectuals must uncover the hidden suffering behind a grand political projects. So they are the representative of the suffering or the collective suffering of people. The other thing about the intellectual is the outsider status. To be an intellectual, one must resist the temptation to join the insiders, the government, corporate boards, or nationalist movements, etc., etc. But for Said, this is somehow paradoxical, because we know that according to Hanan Ashrawi, Edward Said, and of course, joins the Palestinian National Council at the time, and he was trying to be engaged with the national movement of Palestine as a form of liberation, as a form of decolonization. If an intellectual becomes a spokesperson for a government, according to Said, or a defender of the interests of the government, then he or she ceases to be an intellectual and becomes a bureaucrat or propagandist. Then one of the key elements of the intellectual is a secular criticism. But I would like to clarify the confusion here. Some people believe that Edward Said is against spiritual or religious representations of the intellectual. This is untrue, because Said explores the legacy of Julian Benda in his very well-known book, The Betrayal of the Intellectuals, where Said insists on the moral basis of the intellectual, including the definition put forward by Julian Benda about the kind of courage and, of course, the audacity on the part of the intellectual. But at the same time, Said disagrees with Julian Benda according to the very definition of the intellectual. Said goes a little bit further, and he embraces a form of secular criticism, meaning that the intellectual must judge all human suffering by the same universal standard. An intellectual can't condemn the injustices committed by their enemies while making excuses for the injustices committed by their own tribe or state. And I would like to give an example about it. During the time of the Intifada and in the aftermath of the Intifada in Palestine, Said most of the time advocated the liberation and self-determination of Palestinians. But when it came to the Oslo Accords in 1993, Said was against the Oslo Accord simply because, this is the second Nakba for Palestinians, according to Edward Said. And of course, he criticizes Yasser Arafat as well. So Edward Said's intellectual practice is profoundly collaborative. He fiercely rejects the idea of the intellectual as an isolated figure in an ivory tower, believing instead that critique must be lived through art, music, and deep dialogue with one's own community. He keeps giving talk in public places, at universities, campuses, and elsewhere. And we know the very famous refrain that Said's keep reiterating again and again, never solidarity before criticism. Said's engagement with musicians and Arab Palestinian intellectuals reveal a thinker who uses the music as a model for political harmony and literature as a weapon against historical oblivion and historical erasure. Back to the musical counterpoint, there is a term used by Edward Said repeatedly, which is a key ambiguous musical term that has to do with a critical reading of the metropole and the global south simultaneously. So in other words, while Said criticizes imperialism and power dynamics, including the African American people, he was engaged with Malcolm X ideas and debates, and among others. He is very much interested in criticizing, different movements in the global south, and of course advocating liberation movements as well. So this is there's a very famous artistic collaboration with legendary Israeli conductor and pianist Daniel Barenboim, where Edward Said is critiqued by Arab intellectuals and critiqued by many leftist critics as well. But Barenboim's close friendship with Said resulted in the co-founding of the West Eastern Divine Orchestra in 1999. And this project is an embodiment of the concept of the counterpoint, or what Edward Said would call the contrapuntal approach of cultural studies. So the orchestra brought together young classical musicians from Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt to play music together. And of course, the standpoint embraced by Edward Said is totally different than many other Arab intellectuals, but at the same time, they have the same cause. Here, the philosophy of Edward Said was very much about peacemaking, but not about, giving up or surrender. For Said, the orchestra was a radical experiment in counterpoint, a musical term where different independent voices play simultaneously to create a complex harmony. The poetic dialogue as well with Mahmoud Darwish. There is a kind of Mahmoud Darwish used to be the interlocutor, the intellectual interlocutor of Edward Said. They have been friends for more than 30 years, and both of them are two giant pillars of Palestine. Said maintains a profound, deeply emotional relationship with Mahmoud Darwish, widely regarded as the national poet of Palestine. And they were the twin towers of the Palestinian cultural renaissance, transforming the Palestinian experience from a mere political problem into a profound aesthetic and human reality. The chronicle of this position, both Edward Said and Darwish grapple with the pain of exile and the fragmentation of identity, while Said analyzes this through prose and literary theory, and of course, along with the music, Darwish captures it in verse. Said frequently writes about Darwish poetry, and I think Said is the first one who wrote an interesting essay on Mahmoud Darwish. It's titled On Mahmoud Darwish, long time ago, noting that Darwish doesn't just write about land, geography, but about the geography of the soul, as put by Said. In 1993, both Said and Darwish took a brave, highly controversial stand by breaking away from Yasser Arafat and the PLO leadership over the Oslo Accords. Said resigned from the Palestine National Council, and Darwish resigned from the PLO Executive Committee. Both saw the Accords not as path to peace, but as a deeply flawed capitulation that would institutionalize the Israeli occupation and abandon Palestinian refugees. There's a very famous eulogy written by Darwish when Said passed away in 2003. Darwish wrote a stunning, heart-breaking poem for his friend titled Counterpoint. In it, Darwish immortalizes Said as a man who lives on the margins, a bridge between New York and Jerusalem, the man, the intellectual who loves the light because it was free. The critique of Arab autocracy, maybe I can address Adonis and Najib Mahfouz as two key examples here. While Said was a fierce defender of Arab rights at the time against Western imperialism, he is very often equally a critic of Arab regimes, censorship, and intellectual stagnation. Said is engaged heavily with major Arab writers like Abdullah al-Urawi, and of course Adonis, Mahmoud Darwish, among others, to push for an internal cultural revolution. Adonis, for Said, is a very prominent writer and poet, and Said closely engages with the visionary Syrian-Lebanese poet Adonis, who sought to modernize Arab poetry and break away from rigid theological and traditional constraints. According to many critics, Said is one of the first critics who introduced Najib Mahfouz to the Western audience, the only Arab writer who got and received Nobel Prize. Said and it was very passionate about the writing of the Egyptian writer Najib Mahfouz, and he writes extensive essays analyzing Mahfouz's Cairo trilogy, framing Mahfouz not just as a local storyteller, but as a world-class novelist, locating Najib Mahfouz, among other writers like Achiba, and of course Salman Rushdie, and of course, and many others. Unearthing the Silenced, Iqbal Ahmad and Ibrahim Abu Lughod. One of the key terms used time and again by Edward Said is the term affiliation. And usually Edward Said distinguishes between filiation and affiliation, while affiliation according to Said, is a biological bond between two people or more because of due to the blood relations or biological relations. Affiliation transgresses filiation, because affiliation to Edward Said is the kind of intellectual and moral relationship between intellectuals and people. Said's political and intellectual landscape is heavily shaped by a kind of this affiliation of post-colonial scholars who help him found alternative spaces for Arab and Palestinian thought. But of course, we should point out that Edward Said never believes that he is affiliated with post-colonial studies in the very literal sense. It doesn't mean that he opposes post-colonial theory as a whole, but he is against the idea of being pigeonholed. He was introduced to Ibrahim Abu Lughod at the very beginning of his intellectual journey. And Ibrahim Abu Lughod, by the way, is a brilliant Palestinian political scientist, writer, and he is very close to Edward Said. And of course, we know the long story and how Edward Said was inspired by Ibrahim Abu Lughod. Together in the United States, they fought to dismantle the biases of American Middle East studies. And they co-edited Transformation of Palestine in 1971. And they spent decades building institutions like the Association of Arab American University Graduates to give displaced Arab intellectuals a collective voice and a platform to write their own history. And I think it's worth mentioning Iqbal Ahmad as one of the most powerful and inspiring people in the life of Edward Said. Though a Pakistani anti-war activist and intellectual, Iqbal Ahmad was an indispensable figure in Said's life and the crucial link to the broader anti-imperialist movements of the Global South, such as the Algerian FLN. Ahmad pushed Said to look at Palestine not as an isolated tragedy, but as part of a global history of settler colonialism and resistance. So the intellectual as a musician, the intellectual as an artist, but Edward Said usually advocates that the idea of the intellectual as a very engaged person within the public sphere through these diverse friendship and collaborations with Noam Chomsky, with Timothy Brennan, and of course with maybe through the digital collaboration and correspondence with Judith Butler. Said lives out his definition of the intellectual, whether debating politics with Darwish, organizing a complex concert with Daniel Birnbaum, or critiquing Arab dictatorship alongside Cairo's men of letters. Said views culture as a living, breathing arena of resistance. He uses his engagement to prove that the Palestinian narrative and history cannot and could not be silenced so long as it was carried by brilliant music, unyielding poetry, and fearless critique. I think how much time is left? Do I
You can
have?
wrap it up, but if you have a few more things to say, go right
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, I'm almost done. I would like to elaborate on exile as a site of liberation, and I think we should revisit the way in which Edward Said is obsessed with exile. What about belonging? I think this is a question raised by Judith Butler as well. What about belonging? What about national movements? While acknowledging that literal exile is a condition of deep psychological and physical trauma, Said argues that it grants the intellectual a rare form of liberation that the settled or integrated thinker can never achieve. That's why he's always interested in the intellectual as someone who is underway, someone who is under construction, and someone who is immune to dogma. The person, the intellectual, is the one who fits, who resists the dogma, and who should not be co-opted by the dogma of society. That's why exile here for Said is a breakthrough. Double perspective. Said notes that an exile always looks at the world with at least two cultures in mind. This dual vision allows the intellectual to look at dominant power structures with a healthy skepticism. Because you belong fully to neither side, you are liberated to see the flaws and the human potential of both. And last but not least, for Edward Said, I think one of the major misconceptions in the Arab world is the idea of Orientalism. Unfortunately, the first and the most important translation of Edward Said book, Orientalism, into Arabic was a catastrophe. Kamal Abu Deeb translates this book into Arabic, but unfortunately, the Arabic style is very abstract and incredibly obscure. You feel it's like Tristram Shandy, or it's a kind of gibberish. You can't understand many of the paragraphs of this book. But later on, it was translated by Muhammad al-Anani and Muhammad Asfour. I think that these two translations are way better than the first one. That's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tayseer, for being on the program today. It's wonderful to hear your voice, and we published you in Harbinger Asylum maybe over a decade ago, I think, and it was really wonderful to get in touch with you here on World Inkers Network. And the question of exile is interesting because just last night I was discussing with my friend, a Lutheran pastor, on the text of Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah and scriptures. And she mentions how he kind of has this sense of exile as well. And she says, that in the process of the Israelites being displaced, and he writes that, we just kind of settle and be in your place, you're under your condition, and build hope and continue the courage of, as you discuss, of, bringing to light, new thought and new art. And, he talks about she was telling me sort of the comparing to the current America crisis under Trump, of how, we kind of are losing a lot of scientists, and people are just fleeing the country, kind of. And so it's, she was saying how we have to stay and kind of try to, be in exile here and bring up, a new land, I guess you could say, a new kind of cultural flowering. So thank you so much for kind of inviting that prospect and that thought to our conversation. And I'm going to bring on our next guest, who is ANTARA Roy BHATTACHARJEE. She is an English language educator, public speaking expert, poet, and literary enthusiast with extensive experience in English language teaching, communication skills, and academic discourse. She has conducted intensive residential communicative English programs across India, reflecting her commitment to language education and learner empowerment. She holds a master's degree in English and a postgraduate diploma in mass communication. Beyond the classroom, ANTARA is the author of Percipience, Poetry to Perceive, and has contributed poetry, essays, and editorial work to several national and international literary platforms. She has also conducted academic interviews with renowned writers and scholars and has served as a poetry editor for international collaborative projects on environmental humanities and displacement narratives. Her academic interests include post-colonial literature, critical theory, language pedagogy, and cultural studies. And she's going to bring to this discussion how the British colonial empire and its presentation of the people of India and how that served the counterproductive creation of an image of the people of India, and how this narrative sort of dehumanized and misrepresented the culture there, and many other wonderful points of discussion that are pertinent to today's world. In this particular climate, we're facing a lot of these kind of conflicts globally. So here is ANTARA. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dustin, for inviting me. And it's a very pertinent topic, colonialism through the lenses of Edward Said. So before I begin speaking on today's topic, I would like to start with a simple observation that all of us gathered here today, we are communicating in English. So in many ways, this shared language connects people across regions, cultures, and even continents. It has opened doors to education, scholarship, and global communication. So in that sense, one could say that English is one of the lasting legacies of British colonial rule. But now the question is, was it simply a gift? Or is the story far more complex? So this is precisely where Edward Said invites us to think differently. He asks us to look beyond the visible benefits of colonialism and examine the structures of power that accompanied them. While colonialism left behind institutions, railways, and the English language, it also shaped the way colonized societies were represented, understood, and even understood themselves. So with that in mind, let us explore colonialism through the lens of Edward Said. So when we discuss colonialism, we often focus on military conquest and economic exploitation. So Edward Said's seminal book, Orientalism, which was first published in November 1978, invites us to look beyond these visible forms of domination. Said literally argues that colonialism was also an intellectual project. Before controlling territories, colonial powers created systems of knowledge that defined, categorized, and represented colonized peoples. And the British did not merely conquer India, they first created an image of India. And this image portrayed India as backward, irrational, mystical, stagnant, and incapable of governing itself. So such representations became the moral justification for colonial rule. So thus, Orientalism is not merely about prejudice, it is about power disguised as knowledge. So in today's discussion, probably I would be discussing about Orientalism precisely and how it had affected and its relation and how it is relevant to today's context. So when we talk about Edward Said and Orientalism, it revolutionized post-colonial studies because Said argued that the Orient was not a geographical reality, but a cultural invention of the West. Europe represented the East as irrational, emotional, superstitious, passive, timeless. At the same time, Europe represented itself as rational, scientific, progressive, dynamic, and modern. So this opposition created what Said calls a binary. So the East became everything that the West claimed not to be. And India, therefore, was not understood on its own terms, but through a colonial lens. And Edward Said's Orientalism, the concept of Orientalism of the binary, it involves the West placing cultures into rigid us versus them frameworks, where the West defines itself as rational and modern, while portraying the East as the other, mysterious, backward, or spiritual. So in India, this binary operates daily across several sectors. So I would like to cite some examples. So first example would be media and tourism narratives, where global media and travel marketing consistently portray India using the binary of traditional or spiritual East versus modern West. And India is frequently framed as a chaotic, poverty-stricken land whose primary purpose is to provide spiritual salvation or a wellness escape for exhausted Western tourists. Second, the IT outsourcing industry. In corporate and economic discussions, India is often cast in a binary as the back office of the world. Western nations are framed as the thinkers who invent and design, while India is positioned as the executor, a cheap, compliant labor force providing technical support. Third, fashion and cultural appropriation. The global fashion and wellness industries often display this binary by appropriating Eastern traditions, example like yoga, Ayurveda, traditional Indian textiles, while rebranding them as premium. Modern lifestyle concepts. This in itself, this strips the cultural context away and paints the exotic East as a resource for Western consumption. And the fourth one, politics and cinema. International political rhetoric and cinema frequently simplify Indian society into stereotypes. They reduce the complex nation to either a region of stark poverty or one defined exclusively by snake charmers. Like India is the land of snake charmers. Elephants, chaotic streets, stripping Indian individuals of their everyday modern realities. So, these are some examples which right now I have cited, which really it justifies the idea of binary. Like how West has over the period of time, this has somewhat got into that system. Now, when I talk of Orientalism, I have to mention about Foucault, Michel Foucault, because Said was influenced by Foucault's theory of discourse. And Foucault argued that knowledge and power are inseparable. Whoever controls knowledge controls truth. So colonial officials, historians, linguists, surveyors, and educators produced knowledge about India. And this knowledge then justified governance. For example, surveys determined taxation, census reports classified populations, historical writings, they justified intervention, educational policies transformed cultural values, and knowledge became an instrument of rule. So, my next topic would be colonialism through knowledge. How the British Empire did not survive merely because of military strength, but it also depended on census operations, mapping projects, linguistic studies, legal codification, educational institutions, and ethnographic surveys. Bernard Cohn calls this the conquest of knowledge. India was measured, categorized, and classified before it was governed. Every survey created administrative control. Every classification produced political consequences. William Jones, he founded the Asiatic Society in Calcutta in 1784. And he admired Indian civilization and translated Sanskrit texts. But there's something interesting behind it. At first glance, this seems beneficial. However, Said would ask, who gets the authority to interpret India? Because British scholars became the official experts on Indian civilization. Ancient India was celebrated, while contemporary Indians were often portrayed as degenerate descendants of a glorious past. And thus, admiration and domination worked together. The colonizer became the interpreter of the colonized. And it influenced our thought process as well. And even now, I think we look up to the West, how they treat us, how we are being still, the Nobel Prize in Literature, it is considered as one of the coveted prize, if you ask me. So we still look for, they want to be acclaimed. We look for their acclamation from the West. So Here is another interesting example. James Mill's The History of British India, published in 1817, is a perfect example of Orientalism because, remarkably, Mill never visited India. Yet he described Indian society as backward, superstitious, immoral, and inferior. His work became a textbook for colonial administrator. So Said argues that Orientalism allows people to speak authoritatively about the speak without direct experience. And Mill's influence demonstrates how representation can become more powerful than reality. Next, we have another example from Macaulay's Minute on Education in 1835. This is perhaps, I think, the clearest Indian example of Orientalism in practice, where Macaulay argued that European literature and science were superior to Indian knowledge traditions. He famously claimed that a single shelf of European books was worth more than the literature of India and Arabia. His goal was not merely educational reform, it was cultural transformation. The objective was to produce a class of Indians who would think like Englishmen. So this is how Orientalism was translated into educational policy. So with respect to this, we have a theory named downward filtration theory. We know in economics we have a theory known as trickle-down theory, but this downward filtration theory, which is proposed, and in this theory, it was proposed that education should first be provided to a small elite. These educated elites would then transmit knowledge to the masses. But notice the assumption. Knowledge flows from Europe, educated Indians, common Indians. So indigenous systems of learning were excluded. In India, we had traditional educational institutions such as pathshalas, madrasas, and gurukuls. I think pathshalas, whether they still exist or not, but yes, we do have madrasas over here, and gurukuls. They were marginalized. So from Said's perspective, this reflects a hierarchy of knowledge where Western knowledge occupies the top position. And education became a means of cultural reorientation. And Macaulay wanted Indians who were Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, opinions, morals, and intellect. Very interesting. This statement perfectly illustrates cultural colonization, I think. The British did not simply govern bodies, they sought to govern minds. Many educated Indians, they began viewing their own traditions through European categories. And this psychological transformation was one of colonialism's most enduring legacies. The British often claimed they were bringing law, progress, science, modernity to India. This was called, quote unquote, the civilizing mission. But again, according to Said, such narratives concealed colonial exploitation. For example, railways. They're often celebrated as gifts of empire, yet they were primarily designed for military movement, resource extraction, and administrative efficiency. The language of progress masked the realities of domination. Paintings and photographs played a crucial role. British artists, they repeatedly depicted snake charmers, fakirs, maharajas, the kings, bauls like we have over here fakirs and bawuls. They are a group of musicians and who sing songs on the streets. Dancing girls, exotic temples. So these images fascinated European audiences, but they reduced India to spectacle. Industrial centers, intellectual debates, scientific traditions, and everyday realities were ignored. Visual culture reinforced stereotypes. The British consensus categorized Indians by religion, caste, tribe, occupation. And how is it relevant in today's date? It is still relevant because they have sown this seed within our mind. And this new concept of internal colonization, I think, is taking place currently in India. When I mention caste, this caste system, the British census categorized Indians by the religion, caste, tribe. Even now, in today's date, it prevails in India. People are being judged and categorized according to their caste, whether you're a Brahmin, whether you are you belong to which category. I think I would rather call myself an Indian from now on, rather calling myself a Bengali, I'm from Calcutta, or these are, I think, meaningless. I think it's high time we should start calling ourselves as Indians rather than just being, concealed and restricted in our false beliefs of our caste, creed, tribe. I think it's high time we should get past these. Because many identities that had once been fluid became fixed. And it is the same situation prevails even now. And caste categories hardened under colonial enumeration. And that is where I relate to Saeed, the person who wrote this during that time. It is so relevant in today's context. Communities began identifying themselves according to official categories. Thus, colonial knowledge did not simply describe society, it actively reshaped society. Bernard Cohn argued that colonialism operated through investigative modalities. Examples include surveys, statistics, ethnography, revenue records, and knowledge became governance. To know India was to rule India. So Cohn's work strongly complements Saeed's argument. And Indian intellectuals challenged colonial assumptions. Our famous great bard, Gurudev, Pandit Rabindranath Tagore, rejected aggressive Western nationalism. Mahatma Gandhi, he argued in Hind Swaraj that modern civilization was not necessarily superior. Swami Vivekananda, he emphasized the philosophical depth of Indian traditions. Their resistance was intellectual as well as political. They challenged the colonial narrative of inferiority. And later on, after Saeed, we have Homi K. Bhabha, who introduced concepts like hybridity and mimicry, and we literature students, we have it in our syllabi. Then Ashish Nandi examined the psychological impact of colonialism. Dipesh Chakravarti questioned Europe's claim to universal history. Partha Chatterjee explored nationalist responses to colonial discourse. So together they extended Saeed's insights into new directions. So Orientalism has not disappeared. Modern media often portrays Asia, Africa, and the Middle East through familiar stereotypes. Developing nations are frequently represented as chaotic, violent, irrational, dependent. But is it so? I think in today's century, in 21st century, I think we are quite self-sufficient. India is a country, India is a nation, we are. So these narratives echo colonial representation, and this is often called Neo-Orientalism. So Edward Said teaches us that colonialism was not sustained merely by armies and laws. It was sustained by stories. The British, they first created an image of India and then governed according to that image. And representation became power. Whether it's Macaulay's education policy, the downward filtration theory, James Mill's histories, census classifications, and Orientalist scholarship, all reveals the same pattern. Knowledge was used to justify authority. The colonial state ruled not only territory, but also imagination. So it's an open-ended reflection that what if British colonialism had never occurred? Would India have developed alternative forms of modernity? Could indigenous universities, trade networks, or scientific traditions and educational institutions have evolved differently? Would modernization have emerged without cultural subordination? So there is no single answer to it. Yet this question encourages us to imagine history beyond colonial narratives. Perhaps the most important lesson from Edward Said is that no civilization should be understood solely through the eyes of those who seek to dominate it. So here I conclude my session on colonialism through the lenses of Edward Said. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Antara. It's really enlightening to hear how the imperialist project shapes, nations entirely into itself and makes it kind of almost parasite injecting into its host and sort of becomes a hive mind. And people just sort of take it for granted and don't really have the imagination quite yet to really see what could have been other than what is, And
So,
I think,
Dustin, as I was preparing for this webinar, I found myself returning to an interview of Edward Said. I'll just take a minute. An interview of
Okay.
Edward Said where he spoke against all forms of extremism. And what struck me most was his belief that no civilization should claim absolute superiority over another. There must always be balance, dialogue, and mutual understanding. So when a personal level, when I read about Orientalism and the ways in which India and other Eastern societies were represented, I often feel a sense of sadness. It pains me to think that for centuries, entire civilizations were viewed through stereotypes rather than understood in their full complexity. And sometimes I ask myself, why were we so often misjudged? Why was India reportedly portrayed as backward, irrational, or incapable of progress? So despite its rich intellectual, scientific, and cultural traditions, yet I do not think the lesson of Said is to remain trapped in resentment. Rather, it is to become aware of how power shapes representation. The issue is not simply that the West misunderstood. Rather, I think the East is that any society, I think as Taysir was also mentioning about Palestine, any society can misunderstand. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes.
Any
Yes.
society can misunderstand another when it speaks for others instead of listening to them.
Right. Absolutely. And India, prior to British colonialism for many, many centuries, I believe, had generated about a third of the global GDP. Basically, and they did that without the kind of expansionism and imperialism of the British. I find that impressive. And as well as you mentioned, the longstanding tradition of math and science that goes far, far back in India, that, the invention of zero, the introduction of concepts such as that. And, I even believe they had kind of uncovered the basic principle that the earth is a globe and round rather than, this is stuff like observations that go way, centuries back, and sort of the West the colonialist powers left to sort of play like they invented all this stuff, or even for years. You don't even hear how the Arabs had kind of helped in the 12th century move their literature through the troubadours in France to bring what we consider the chivalry and romance. Prior to that, we had a kind of a system of extreme level of patriarchy where women were not seen as really fully independent, and they were kind of the property of their husband. And then this introduction from the traditions of the Arabs through the Quran and the Islamic tradition brought in sort of a counterpunch to that, and gradually, the Europeans sort of felt like they should move towards a romantic love approach rather than this kind of property relations. And so they like to point out, a lot of people in the West like to make kind of the romantic relations in say India feel like it's forced or it's property or women are treated badly. And I and really all this, and it feels like to me, based on my understanding, we don't really have room to talk because we have a standing tradition of that as well. And I don't think the British Empire there helped much with that problem. And I don't think it was really as nearly as bad prior to the British approach to India, which was, my understanding of history, it's the dowry system and things like that were not intended to be so patriarchal. They were intended to help females, not really make them into property. And
it still persists in some parts of India. Dowry.
Right. Yeah, and they can't. You hear. At least in I still hear a lot of kind of this people of India are backwards. I've seen comments on like Facebook when there was something to do with a pond in New York or something that they kept, or a swimming pool that they kept saying they found feces in a lot of times, and people were making comments about how it must have been Indian tourists and things like this. So they're trying to go back to that whole dehumanization rhetoric, and really it's just kind of, you want to think about how you're portraying other people, and the funny thing is, and the very hypocritical part of this is, there's so much pride in the Christian tradition and how it presents, how it's based the Indian or the Western thinking on human rights and things like this. And you go back to the whole dignity of the individual, and people love to generalize about entire groups of people in this way and portray them as a certain thing innately. And it really goes against that entire focus of individual rights and individual folk. And that whole tradition of individual dignity is not exclusively Christian. It's definitely very well expressed there, but there's tons of cultures globally, even prior to the Christian faith, that had a similar background. There's one in Nigeria. I can't remember the name of the philosophy that was, well before the Christian faith. So yeah, it's just kind of hard to say why anyone should feel entitled to completely rob a country or a people of their dignity and their personhood and their culture, and just kind of and even sometimes take it and misappropriate it and make it into their own thing, where and make it as if they invented or they understood it better when it had nothing to do with them to begin with. And so as you mentioned, the meditations and yoga and things like this, and how that's treated as sort of a consumption, it becomes a capitalist product rather than than something that's sacred and essential. It's yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. You bring in some very, very good questions of identity, culture, and things of this nature. And back to the question of exile. In a way, it feels like the essence of this colonialist project and making and reshaping of people's identity for the sake of taking their country the way that is taking place there. It feels like exile can go back to that. Your identity is exile, even in your own space. You're being told who you are, and that just is really robbing the essence of a individual dignity with capital D. I think you bring a great question there of how people of India look at the Nobel Prize as sort of a major accomplishment or something, and it is, of course, but is it the only thing that a literary person can strive for when it doesn't seem to really give account to the entire globe of literature out there and what it could be? It's very
Can I jump
Western
in, Justin? Sorry for interrupting you.
Mhm.
I can just
Go ahead.
I wanna just address Antara's representation of India, under the rubric, under the umbrella of colonial context through the lens of Edward Said. This is very interesting, and I think it intersects with what's going on in the Arab world. One of the very pressing issues nowadays is the idea of neoliberalism. The draconian waves of neoliberalism that have conquered the world, not only the global south, everywhere. The role of the university. Look at what Edward Said says about the university during the 80s and the 90s. It looks like utopia, according to Edward Said. Whereas, in fact, in the aftermath of the 80s and 90s, during the time of Donald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, the university has been shifted in a dramatic way. The role of the university is no longer the same compared to the one envisioned, through the lens of enlightenment and liberalism. I'm talking about the classical version of liberalism. The university as the hub of democracy, the free thinking, critical thinking, etc. Nowadays, unfortunately, the university has become co-opted by the status quo. The university has been reversed and dismantled by neoliberalism. I think this is the worst version of liberalism ever. And this is something critiqued by Edward Said early on in the late 80s, and even in the aftermath of the Oslo Accords and the phenomenon of the so-called NGOs. And what would NGOs do with the ethics of society and the idea of making everything for sale and making everything commercial. I think this is one of the challenges that we have to address these days, especially when we talk about the global system, the global order, and even critiquing Nobel Prize, critiquing all of these Eurocentric narratives, Eurocentric grand narratives, if you want to say. And this is incredibly important, especially when it comes to the idea of making everything privatized. The idea of privatization of the university, and nowadays in the Arab world, they are bragging about making the university a smart university, and I think maybe these issues intersect with Edward Said legacy regarding the idea of
Absolutely.
decolonizing the mind. If you go back to Boogie,
Exactly, decolonizing the mind is what is important right now. Like we
Absolutely.
should be united. It's very important.
And currently
look
here
at
in the U.S.,
talking for English everywhere.
there's a huge movement, of course, of sparked by Trump, of the anti-DEI and those sort of things, and they're really getting pretty rigid on how they police a lot of thinking. A professor here in Texas had to resign. He voluntarily resigned because they said no transgender discussion, and he happened to be teaching Plato's symposium, and there's a sort of hermaphroditic character that's mentioned there, and he said he couldn't bring the character in, he couldn't talk about it because people would sometimes bring in transgender, or it would invite the possibility of this. So there's like this soft power threat that they've covered everything with you even bring this slightly into discussion, you're in trouble, and no one wants to go through that. And I've actually had friends here in Texas that left, that like literally they vacated, they went to another state to get away from this kind of Trumpian censorship regime. And it's not just Trump, it's his buddies too, like Greg Abbott here in Texas. These guys don't want any racial discussion, sexuality discussion in the universities. We're going to go back to good old-fashioned American values of rugged individualism, frontier spirit, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And the right wing is looming large. Look at what's going on in Italy at the time being. Marx and Gramsci are banned to be taught at universities. And it happens everywhere.
Yeah, it's globally happening, and I think it is what it comes down to is class. It's a lot of these billionaires are running scared because they know that they've really taken too much from the general pool, and they're terrified. That we're people in general. I mean, have started to kind of see, even conservatives, a lot of kind of seeing there's a desperation. If you're in medical and student debt, you're not going to be able to be a good worker or whatever, and so you're going to say, do something, get the government to tax whatever. And we have like, Mayor Mamdani here in New York City, other things, they're saying, we can know, these guys are like, we don't want to have a 2% taken from us of our $1 billion or whatever, because it hurts us so badly. Well, what about the kids starving on the street that you don't ever see? And it's a kind of a, and they gutting school lunches. And and I feel like the current phenomena is, I don't know if it's by design or just Trump is stupid. But he's scaring a lot of scientists out of the country. High earners are saying in the next few years they want to get out. They're terrified of the excessive levels of partisanship that are tearing us apart. And so there's not really any sense of a future at this point. The economy is dwindling down and people can't survive. So it's getting to the point where a lot of these very wealthy people, I think, realize globally they need to start working together. In France, they've bought up a bunch of outlets and media outlets. Billionaires are doing that. And here I was learning that a billionaire in Pennsylvania was, helping fund a lot of this Texas, switch to. They've become to very much anti-Muslim, anti-Islam, and they're kind of that sort of trickle-down ideology is coming out. And I sometimes joke that they talk about trickle down economics, but all you get is the ideology. You don't get any money or anything. It's a sort of it really is. It's all economy, and these guys are being hogs, and they're and they want the power, the ability to press a button and everything goes awry, and they know they can do that. They want that power and that money. And of course, I'm generalizing about class, but it seems like that to me, that a lot of these guys, and they're always bashing government inefficiency, and and how do you expect people to live when so much? Here it's like 80% of the productive assets are owned by 1% of the corporations. So it's really becoming a centralization of economic power issue, I think, and that's creating a lot of disconnect amongst the population and the elites ruling us at this point. And so I think Trump kind of rolled in on that too. And that's another part of a narrative function that, he put a whole kind of, I guess you could say like a show on, to bring people into his fold. And then it turns out, it was just a show. He's not gonna do any fixing or anything. It's getting worse. So yeah, I don't know what you guys feel about the sort of the global climate of how this legacy has sort of pushed us to the brink, really, and maybe what do we do to go forward? What kind of cultural production and intellectual discourse can we do to move and advance the human race into a more productive and positive feeling of, how do we do this in this day and age? It's hard.
Well, I think this is a very interesting question regarding the idea of ecological genocide. Ecological genocide, is very much ignited, very much, motivated by the kind of depoliticization. Look at what's going on in the US. Trump turns his back to the ecological, treatise regarding the protection of the climate change, and how to wage a war against what's going on in terms of ecology. The problem is there is a complete, state of depoliticization going on. This is one point. The other point is the idea of neoliberalism, as I mentioned. They no longer care about ecological crisis, ecological and the economic or the so-called climate change. The problem is, I guess, especially look at in the global South, we have this idea of ecological genocide is affecting everywhere. And I think this is something that we have to stand up for. We have to, the idea has to do with the institutions within the governments. And that's why the whole world looks at America as being the imperial power. That most of the decisions made across the globe are impacted by what's going on in America. But so the decentralization of the imperial power in America is important. I know China has a big role here, but all in all, I think we have to address this issue more seriously, and I think many things should be done in this regard.
I think so. I definitely think looking at this resistance against climate science. I mean, even here in the U.S., they've deleted databases and destroyed, or at least from what I understand, requested certain documents just kind of be burned. I guess just getting rid of them. Libraries that were full of climate data and stuff. I mean, they're just kind of pushing that into the bottom of the feed here. So it's not really seeming to be a sense. I mean, they think that a lot of the projection is that climate and science and things is a globalist conspiracy to try to confine the U.S. and rob it of its sovereignty. And obviously that's not true, because the whole entire planet is looking at this and going, we must find some way to adapt and remedy this issue. And of course it's even in China, they're looking at what to do, globally. It's not just like pushing on the U.S. and trying to say, you guys fix it and everyone else is going to abandon the project. It's the other way around. We've given up and decided it's not. I mean, I watched Trump say he thought it was ridiculous. It was a hoax, and the typical kind of rhetoric, that small-minded, one-word kind of monosyllabic rhetoric that's given out of this administration. And so I find that's. I don't think our governments are going to pick up. It really, I mean, I think you have a point where, you mentioned that trying to, address that, I guess, more organically, because it's not going to happen with the administration, or the governments don't seem to be really wanting to look at it anymore. I guess I don't know why that happened. I really am confused about it, because, Trump is, he's going after a lot of that data and everything. I mean, just, he's been doing that with a lot of things, his administration, trying to destroy information that's been collected over, decades, and just go back on the consensus and say, well, this is nonsense. And they don't tell us why. It's nonsense. That's it. Don't even listen to it anymore. Just forget it, And a friend of mine here on the YouTube is asking if you can ask a question. Yes, feel free to drop your question there in the YouTube comments, and I'll bring it up on the screen here, and we can talk about whatever your concern may be. But yeah, I definitely see. What do you think, Antara, of some of these issues, these ongoing kind of destabilizing and disconnect going on globally?
Yeah, what you said, I think just now TAYSEER mentioned about ecological genocide. So I think it has got its roots deep-rooted to post-colonialism, post-colonial eco-criticism, which belongs to, post-colonial studies and environmentalism. And I think the capitalists, they have a role to play. In the trickle-down theory also we have seen, because environment is an integral part of a society and culture. And for that, I think people, those who have, with them, the main capital with them, with which they're running their nation, it has to be, I think, dispersed equally. And I don't know, that is a very hypothetical situation which I'm imagining right now. It is, I don't know whether it would be possible or not. TAYSEER can say that it's all the very hypothetical situation. But in order to restore environmental justice, I think the capitalists of the society, like as TAYSEER was mentioning about liberal humanism and capitalism, where ecological burdens, toxicity, deforestation, climate impacts, specifically in the global south, in the marginalized groups, I think it can be curbed through this. I think that is the best effective way. We have to channelize it in the best hands. And I think government also has a major role to play. So if it is a mixed economy, if we can work together, as you were mentioning, Dustin, I think we can curb out these problems which we are facing right now. And it's very important that if we have to live for a better society, we have to work hand in hand for a better society. And again, like we are decolonizing our mind, decolonizing nature is also important. What do you say, TAYSEER? Decolonizing nature?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Decolonizing nature is important. The way we treat nature as a source of exploitation and consumption is incredibly brutal. And I think it can be sustained through education and the media. As we have been taught by Antonio Gramsci, the media and education are two key, organizations or institutions through which we can change the collective consciousness of people. It's extremely important to pay attention to the way in which we treat nature and how we, address our relationship with nature.
I think
mixed economy is very important.
One thing I find disturbing here, and as a United States person, it's hard to kind of discuss a lot of these things with people around you, and there's a kind of a sense of the Western world could do no wrong. We've never done anything wrong. Everything's everyone else kind of approach. And you mentioned ecology, climate issues. They just don't want to believe it. It's almost a kind of denial because they don't want to think, capitalism has ever done any harm to anything. And we're just better and we're just better working and all this. And so it comes to the point of like bringing up these issues creates a cognitive dissonance that people don't want to handle. They really want to believe capitalism is this immortal, perfect system that can never be replaced by anything. And if you challenge that, you're labeled a communist, a Marxist, a socialist. And it's kind of like, maybe there's a way to amend the sort of the, economy and the way it's devastating and draining so much of the rest of the planet and not really doing the best for working for the general society. I mean, even founding fathers recognized this kind of greed and avarice, unchecked and unregulated in a way, is harmful. And the general good should be the focus. And to even think general good, you're called a socialist, you're automatically, we have to focus on the individual. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, the whole concept of individual dignity seems to apply me first and then everybody else, I don't have to worry about. I don't want to think about slavery or how bad that was. Even recently when they brought that to the UN, I think it was Ghana that brought that resolution to the UN, and the US and Argentina and Israel, I think, were the 3 states that voted no. We don't want to apologize, and we're not going to pay reparations. And every other country that voted was a kind of yes or indecisive on that. And so it's just a continuous lack of being able to reflect on the hideousness of this and what it's done, and seeing all of this devastation of human life and human culture going on, and not really thinking. I mean, of course, you could say extraction of fossil fuels created the energy revolution, which built so much great, into the economy and made life better in so many ways. And that's great. I mean, it is. But if you can't see the full picture and how we're at a crisis point, I think that's kind of worrisome when you can no longer self-reflect enough to see the big picture of it. And we have, this question about here with my friend there. He's, I believe, in Nigeria. And let's see. Okay, so he's asking about whether or not, kind of what it is imperialism. If he said, he's asking if they, if it's a country serving its own interest and trying to keep itself relevant. And I think that's an interesting question. I don't know how much of what we call expansionism is a country sort of growing out of itself and then trying to move into other territories and whatever to try to keep itself, culturally relevant. I find it's a double-edged sword, really, because as mentioned earlier, we have the building of trade routes and things like this that create a cultural nexus to have discussions and bring people together in some ways. But you also have that whole destructive aspect of it where people are dehumanized.
Like I was mentioning about railways also, neo-colonialism, the expansion of railways by the British.
Right.
So it's an indirect control by the foreign powers and multinational corporations also.
Right. Yeah, I find and he mentions like kind of a thought of countries being more self independent, I guess, and self-reliant and what we call self-determined, more or less independent in their economy and not so much dependent on the global trade networks and things. I wonder how much. I mean, what can we really do? Because free trade is good, I think, but at the rate it's we've had this. I mean, we even have here people like Peter Thiel, who's his big thing is the Antichrist is going to come if we don't continue this massive acceleration of technology, and this kind of weird esoteric thing that the techno-fascists have put out, and it's really bizarre how these ideologies are kind of coming into existence from these guys' imaginations. And I don't know if they just want to feed their ego somehow, or I don't know what it is. But all the, in my opinion, it feels like what's going on today is that these guys realize that sustainability is lacking, and people, and they know that, at least to a degree, there's a responsibility on their end, and they're kind of in a way retaliating and trying to push people back out. I think a lot of the anti-civil rights stuff, it has nothing to do with a globalist agenda. It has to do more with, civil rights bring the common people together. And so they want to try to pull that off, that Band-Aid off the corporate stance and make it kind of like, now we look at that and see how this reality is sort of, now they want to use that to kind of divide people in a way. It feels like that really the whole process is just kind of unraveling. I don't know what's going to be the next step. I know a lot of hoping a lot of countries outside of the Western, nexus sort of start to grow and develop and see renaissance and flourishing. And if maybe we don't bomb them first, I mean, I don't know what else to, go ahead.
I think there's a problem which is posed by European universalism when it comes to the idea of European universalism, that there's usually universal values imposed on the global South regarding what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be, to survive? And I'm reminded of Imam Worstein, a brilliant argument on the three categories that, have kind of perpetuated the idea of European universalism. First, the idea of human rights. Second, the idea of clash of civilizations. And third, the idea of Orientalism. These three categories would make it very difficult for the global South to flourish, to thrive. I'm not saying that there is no sense of autonomy, there is no sense of willingness or the optimism of the will, as put by Gramsci. India, for example, has tremendous sources, natural resources. This is a very powerful country on different paths. But the idea, when it comes to caste or casteism in India, the sustaining the caste system in India is one symptom of this European universalism. That is the heritage of colonialism, and it's still there. You go to the Middle East.
Truly agree with you.
Exactly. You go to the Middle East, which is a colonial, term. Why it is called the Middle East? It's the Arab world, or whatever you want to call it. You demarcate these borders according to the European universalism. That is to say, we have a center and we have a periphery. Unfortunately, as if there's a kind of very much sustainable political will to make those countries poor and impoverished. And I think the idea of poverty is interesting in the Arab world. Most of the time they put the blame on the poor, that they are lazy and they are not looking for jobs, etc. They try to justify unemployment. But the fact on the ground is more draconian. The fact that those people are made poor, they are made impoverished by the status quo. They are not allowed to flourish. They are not allowed to thrive. Look at the students in the United States of America. That is the strongest country in the world. Nowadays, it's no longer like in the past. You get enrolled at the university, you can't have a scholarship. It's almost very difficult, and it's highly competitive, and it's a class-made system. It's based on the classes of people. So the haves and the have-not. So this is of the world system and the world order as well.
One thing I'm curious about, you there and Jordan, and just thinking about Islamic culture, and it sort of has this like really long history of science and culture and deep thinking, and it seems to be now in the current era, at least here in the West, it sort of seems to be this tendency to show Islamic culture as inherently violent and backwards, and these these fundamentalist terrorist movements are basically Islamic and not just an offshoot of the religion being used to justify the violence. I wondered if you have any insights on maybe the development of that kind of terrorism or violence being perpetrated, and why it's going on, and also maybe to highlight the fact that most of the victims of said terrorism are Muslims themselves, and that's often forgotten. A lot of extreme people, hurt their own in their own country. They go after people who are there who are moderate or who don't want to conform to the kind of extreme versions that they have. So maybe is there like a parallel, do you think, between that level of thinking about Islam and maybe some of the Christian nationalists here in this country, in the U.S., who want to frame religion in a political format and make it into a weapon of power rather than just, it's a personal journey with a metaphysical meaning to life? And what do you think of that?
Yeah, you wanna discuss that, Antara? Or well, first of all, I wanna say something extremely important regarding the idea of Islam. What is Islam, after all? I think this is the most misunderstood term ever. It's a very slippery term. When you talk about Islam, is it the Sharia? Right. Is it the jurisprudence? Is it the culture of Muslims people? Is it about the civilizations of the ancient Islamic nation? Or is it about the misconception of Islam in the West? So most of the time, if you go back to the medieval time, there is a kind of, Europe is very adjacent to the Mediterranean and to the Islamic world. And the idea of the weaponization of Islamic terrorism is an idea that have been promoted by different Orientalist narratives. If you go to the medieval time in France, there were sonnets reciting slurs and curses against Prophet Muhammad and against Muslims as well. And the same thing applies to the representation of Islam in the West as well. But what's going on the ground? Look at the classical enemy of the West before Islam. It was, communism. You're talking about communism as being anti-European. And we have learned through the experience of the Middle East and what's going on here that Islam is the antithesis of Europe. That is the idea that has been, sustained and normalized by Western media and by Western narratives as well. We know that some Islamic groups, militias, etc., were used and in service of some imperial powers. What happens in Afghanistan is a good example. In Afghanistan, the idea of jihad or jihadism is one of those ideas that have to do with politics rather than religion. But I think religion has been somehow, invested by politics. So this intersection is extremely important. ISIS and the history of ISIS and what happened in Iraq and Syria is another good example of this misrepresentation. Does ISIS stand for Islam? The answer is not, because simply you go to any Muslim country, you live peacefully, you can coexist with people, so easily. And Jewish and Christian people live here for thousands of years in the Middle East. There's no tension at all, except that tension which is exacerbated by the colonial powers. One example is what's going on in Israel. The only country in the world that would give a passport for anyone just because of religion. Just because of religion. This is something amazing. It's extraordinary, because simply you wouldn't find any other country that would give you a passport just because of your religion. This is something unusual, but it's the way of weaponizing religion. We know. I would give other examples from Jewish history and the theology of liberation, what is called theology of liberation, which is extremely important. Look at the archaeology done in Palestine. Many historians and archaeologists try to prove that Jewish people existed there for thousands of years before the Palestinians, just to justify the colonialism and to justify settler colonialism in Palestine. But later on, many Jewish and Israeli scholars proved that this is wrong, and this is something that is related to the weaponization of religion to serve, the settler colonialism and Zionism as an example here. And this is extremely important, how religion intersects with politics, how religion is abused and used, by these narratives of politics, and the idea of domination is extremely important. So this is one point. The other idea is I think Islam, if we go back to a very interesting book by Edward Said, Covering Islam, that's a wonderful book written by Edward Said, and it has to do with the representation of Islam in the aftermath of the toppling of Al-Khomeini in Iran, and what happened after that in Iran, and of course across the Islamic world. This clash of civilization that has been promoted and mitigated, is always bound by Orientalism, bound by these mainstream stereotypes about Muslim people, or even not only Muslim people, non-Western people, as put by some of the Orientalists, the West and the rest. And most of the time we think of the West as being the standard by which all nations should be measured and should be assessed, according to the universal values put forward by Western civilization.
Very interesting. Antara, do you want to add anything as we begin to wrap up the program?
Okay, religion, I think it cannot be considered as a pillar of our society. I don't think so. At least in 21st century, I don't think. Although this, I won't mention the name of any party, but this religion is also becoming a way to bag votes in our Indian democracy. Mm-hmm. We call it as democracy. Like Taysir was mentioning about what is Islam. Like what is Hinduism, if I say? It is known as the Sanatan Dharma, which has come like from time immemorial. It's like Hinduism is a part of Sanatan Dharma. Like it was always there since time immemorial. So why to take the shelter of religion to bag votes, or to be in that layer of the society where I will be, where there will be discretion, where there will be discrimination. There will be discrimination. So I condemn this concept of religion, as Edward Said also has said, and as I was saying, in Orientalism he has mentioned this, that this was also somewhere deep rooted, in his work in Orientalism. He has mentioned about it. So this is somewhere we have to, I think, come out of this notion of caste, creed, religion. And as Taysir was mentioning about weaponizing of religion, like love jihad, like this. So I think people's democracy cannot rely on any of these pillars of our society. If we have to enter into a society where we have equality in the eye of law, or equality for everyone. We have to come out of these barriers. We have to break these barriers. And for that, we have to start believing into it. I think education, teachers of our society, they have a bigger role to play for the next generation to come, for the generations to come. The teachers and professors, they have a bigger role to play also. And also it has to, first of all, the families, they have to, they have to tell their kids, and they have to, it's not that, prayer is a form of, we pray, but prayer cannot be a pillar of anybody, or a pillar of a society to, or prayers or religion or caste or creed. We cannot judge anybody through this, whether you are praying every day or not, whether you are a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian. No. First of all, I think the sense of nationality should be there. That is very, very important. I think, Taysir, in fact, Palestine is still called the state of Palestine, right? Yet, I think, has it, it has not got that recognition of this thing, of a country.
It's recognized by many countries across the world. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the political status as an independent state. It's still occupied. And, Israel is the only country in the world that doesn't demarcate its political borders. It's open. Nowadays, at this time, Lebanon is invaded by Israel, and part of Lebanon is now grabbed by Israel, and it's under occupation, and it's still justified under the name of self-defense as a as a kind of political and settler colonial procedure. This is exactly the classical technique of post-colonial and settler colonial Zionism. And this is extremely, what's going on the social media, what's going on the public media is incredibly contradictory. That you feel that what's going on in Palestine is kind of sidelined, kind of marginalized.
That's exactly where I am pointing towards, that, India is a subcontinent though. India is a subcontinent. We have varied religions, varied cultures, but I think the nationalistic feeling, the feeling of that I am an Indian, that should come up before. And then, with time, we have to believe in ourselves. And we have to, I think after 10 years or 20 years down the line, it will change. I think change is constant.
It's very important to foster the values of solidarity, universality among people across the globe. We have some kind of academic campaigns, but still insufficient and not enough, because simply what's going on the ground is really brutal, and it's beyond our imagination. The genocide in Gaza is the most important thing, and it's the most draconian action perpetrated by Israel. More than 70,000 martyrs, 70,000 citizens. I think what happens in Gaza and the aftermath of Gaza would make us now more conscious of the global order. It's unfolding, and it's still in the making.
That is wonderful, and it's a very positive thing. And I really want, after 10 years, when we should a webinar like this, I think all these beliefs, which were there, which Saeed had perhaps mentioned in Orientalism, perhaps, I don't know, there will be many theorists yet to come again in future. But I literally hope that, from this Orient and an Occident, this us versus them, this belief of this binary, it it slowly, just, it should not be there anymore. And
Right.
independent way, so that we should be having a progressive mindset, and we should be able to voice out our opinions, like independently, like we are doing right now. Thank you, Dustin, for giving us this opportunity to voice out
Thank you.
what we believe.
And thank you,
That is very
Antara.
important. And I
You
hope
were the initiator
this
of
would,
this wonderful discussion. You brought this to us. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up, and I just want to make a couple of quick points. One thing is how the media as kind of creates a detached version of reality, and we talked about, you mentioned social media, things of this nature. We can't even have the sentiment or feeling of what's going on with the people of Gaza currently, because we don't see that we don't feel the depth of pain and loss and mourning and what's going on there, and just a media picture and things of this nature, and they're telling us secondhand what's going on, and we don't know how to trust it or what. And so, and all the ideology is driving a lot of what the media tells us. So I just wanted to highlight that the human pain that's being experienced, not just by the Gaza people, but the people seeing what's going on and knowing it's happening and don't feel like they can do anything to stop or to make that suffering stop. We're humans. We're supposed to feel for each other, and that's very important. And also, as Antara mentions,
empathy, sympathy, empathy.
Exactly. And trying to see people not as binary, not me versus you, us, them. Look
Absolutely.
at things as a universal kind of humanism, as Saeed mentions, being able to respect interculture, intersubjectivity, things of this nature, and not see that yourself as a superior, inferior kind of the binary there. And so, people across the world are humans universally, and people think. Thank you so much to all our viewers today and the questions and thoughts.
Thank you, Antara.
And thank you. And I hope people will take a look.
Thank
if
you,
you want to give a final
Dustin.
plug to your, if you want to get Taysir, if you want to give your plug to the Palestinian anthology at the end here, to tell us a little bit about where we can find it and what you would like, anything you'd like to say at the end here about this book. I believe, if I remember, it's We Shall Live, I think. Is that the title? Something like that?
Yeah, it's the title is actually You Must Live, a new poetry.
Can you mail me, Taysir? Is it possible for you to mail it through?
Yeah, of course. I would love to.
Thank you.
To send you a copy, and just you send me your mailing address, and I'll be happy to tell the publisher to send you a copy.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Yeah, sure. We are happy that the second edition of You Must Live has been published by Penguin just on June 18. And I hope the circulation of this book will be as expected. It's still at the beginning, and this is one step forward. We hold on to the optimism of the will and the pessimism of the mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very paradoxical.
Wonderful translation of Palestinian voices and poetry. I hope that book continues to travel globally, and people hear the stories there and resonate.
Yeah. And I would like to say that, of course, one of the things that we have emphasized throughout this anthology, the idea that those Palestinian writers write from inside Gaza. More than, we're talking about 30 poets. Most of them from Gaza, and 4 other poets from Ramallah, from inside Palestine. Just Mus'ab Abu Tuha made it to the US. He was detained, he was tortured, and then fortunately he could go to Egypt, and then he was sent with his family to the US, where he is now teaching, I guess. And he's a public figure at the time being, Mus'ab Abu Tuha. And of course, many other brilliant poets, Khalid Jum'a, Walid al-Aqad, Nasir Rabah, and many other poets. We are glad that those people could make their voice heard globally.
Well, thank you both for being on the program, and I hope others will join us on future discussions on these sort of topics, intercultural and global dialogue, literary discussions, artistic pursuits. And you guys out there watching today, I hope you'll get yourself sitting down to the table and or to your desk, read, write, create, whatever you do best, you know, instruct the world to be better, bring some culture to your life, and hopefully we'll see you guys next time. I appreciate all the talk, and absolutely have a great day. Everybody out there, just keep your faith and keep moving. Thank you so much. World Inkers Network. I am Dustin Pickering, your host.
Thank you so much.
Here. You are welcome. Excellent. Thank you so much, guys.
Good one.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Take care, everybody out there. Get to writing.
Thank you.
Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot.